Hello there and welcome to Trad Town. It's just me, your old buddy Grizzly Jim, and today we're going to be looking at an unsolved mystery let's be honest, it's pretty famous. If you haven't heard this mystery, you've been living under a rock. There isn't a Netflix documentary, podcast, YouTuber that hasn't at some point covered this story, and now it's my turn. So I'm going to give it my particular spin. It's got a lot of things that interest me. It's sort of conspiracy theories, unsolved mysteries, folk heroes, and it's set over the Pacific Northwest, which is one of my favorite places in the world. So without further ado, cut yourself a huge slice of cherry pie, pour yourself a great big mug of coffee, take it easy, sit back, relax. Let's get into it as we talk about the unsolved mystery of D.B Cooper. So, picture the scene. It's Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, in a little airport in Portland, Oregon. It's just like any other airport across America, a little hub airport, lots of people taking trips, business trips, heading home to see family for the holidays. It's going to be quite busy, quite bustling. And in walks our hero of this story, or maybe he's an anti-hero, but we'll get into that. Walks into the airport dressed in a very inconspicuous business suit. White shirt, black tie, black overcoat, black trousers, loafers, carrying an attaché briefcase, completely inconspicuous. There's a million people walk through that airport dressed exactly the same way, going on their business trips and whatnot. So you're not going to notice this guy really. He's going to blend in. It's hiding in plain sight. So this very inconspicuous looking chap walks up to the ticket desk and buys a ticket for flight 305, which is non-stop from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Pays his money, gives the name Cooper, and just as he's about to walk away, in like a classic Columbo thing, he turns around and is like, just one more thing. He wants the ticket attendant to confirm that the plane, flight 305, is in fact a Boeing 727. Now, that is a piece of information that's going to become very, very important as we go on. But a Boeing 727 is one of the very few airliners that you could possibly open up the rear of the plane while it's in flight and jump out of, which is the crux of the whole story. But we'll circle back round to that in a minute. But that is a very important part of the story, that this plane needed to be a Boeing 727. So Cooper would take his attaché case and his trench coat and whatever, walk off, sit in the airport bar, sit down, orders a bourbon and soda, waits for his flight to board. So far, nothing really out of the ordinary. So at some time after about 2 p.m, people start boarding the 727 serial number N467US, and they start making their way to their seats. Nothing unusual so far. At about 2:50 p.m, flight 305 takes off. Everything's going according to schedule for our American friends. At approximately 2:50 p.m, flight 305 takes off according to schedule. No problems. Everything is ticking along lovely. At around 3 o'clock, the flight attendants start making their way down the plane, making sure people are buckled in, all the seatbelts work, whether or not they need a drink or anything like that. Just the normal kind of things flight attendants do on a regular, everyday flight. And as they make their way down the plane, this particular flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, makes her way to Cooper, asks if everything's okay, make sure everything's tray in the upright position, all the usual stuff. But what Cooper does, he hands her a note. Now, she just automatically pockets this note. I'm sure as an air stewardess, as a flight attendant, I'm sure she's used to kind of being hidden by chaps, and maybe getting a note off a passenger isn't completely out of the ordinary for her. I don't know, but he gives her this note. She comes, okay, thanks, I'll read that in a bit. And he's like, no, I'm gonna need you to read that note. So she opens up the note, and written on a piece of paper, printed, is, Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want you to sit down. So Florence, this poor air stewardess that's been caught up in this craziness, sits down next to D.B Cooper. And he's got a briefcase on his lap. He opens it up, and what is in this briefcase appears to be a bomb. About 6 sticks of dynamite strapped to an electronic device, possibly a battery. And he's like, see this wire here? All I have to do is plug this wire in, and we're all dead. So she's like, oh, crap. I just, you gotta bear in mind, this is the day before Thanksgiving. Now, I don't know where you are in the world, but in America, Thanksgiving's kind of a big deal, a good time for families to get together. So she probably just wants to go home to her family, have a nice long weekend, relax. And I don't know. She doesn't need this. She doesn't need this dude in a trench coat sitting on a plane with a bomb in his briefcase. That's the last thing she wants. So he basically tells her his demands, what he requires. That is, in fact, $200,000 and 4 parachutes, which on the surface isn't a great deal of demand. He wants the plane to land in Seattle, Washington, get refueled, take off again. And then he's going to be in control of the flight. He's deciding everything. He's the head honcho. He's in charge. I think it's pretty safe to assume at this point you could probably work out that he's going to take the money and the parachute and jump out the back of the plane. Hence why he wanted the Boeing 727, a plane that could have the rear doors open during flight. So this flight attendant makes her way to the cockpit and she relays the information to the pilots. And again, they're probably, what a terrible day. There's a man on the plane with a bomb. Oh, I hate Wednesdays. So the pilots then relay all that information to control, and then control relay that information to the FBI. So the FBI are in charge now. They're looking into the case. And what they decide to do, they're actually going to go through with his demands. They're not going to try and negotiate or anything. They're just going to give him what he wants to try and bring this to a resolution. During the flight, Cooper is very keen for nobody else on board other than the flight crew to know what's going on. He doesn't want any fuss. He doesn't want any heroes. There's all sorts of things that could go wrong. So the less people that know about this hijacking, the better. So other than the flight crew, who are probably crapping a chicken, the flight, it just goes normally. There's no issues. Cooper sits back. He drinks his way through 2 more bourbon and sodas. Kicks back, enjoys the flight, just while he knows that, hopefully he's going to walk out of this with a bunch of money. At approximately 3:39 p.m, Flight 305 lands at Seattle-Tacoma Airport and refuels. The plane doesn't taxi to a terminal like it normally would. It stays out on the runway quite far away from everybody else. 36 of the 42 people on board are let off the plane as normal. The passengers don't know anything. One of the specifications of Cooper was the fact that none of the passengers on board were to know what was going on. I mean, I guess he didn't want anyone to kind of be a hero or anything, and the less people that knew, the better, I suppose, from his point of view. So none of the passengers knew. They didn't know anything about this till they got off the plane into the airport, where they were met by the FBI and they were debriefed by the FBI. Now, the weird thing is, not anybody on the plane could really give them any solid information about this chap, this Cooper, sitting at the back of the plane with his trench coat on, maybe some sunglasses on, drinking his bourbon and soda. I suppose when you look back at it, it might have seemed pretty dodgy. I don't know. But, I mean, I guess when you think about someone trying to be inconspicuous and dressing like that, nowadays they'd stick out like a sore thumb. But this was the 70s, so who can say? But nobody could really give any solid information about Cooper. And they sort of were all debriefed and then sort of let go. And I guess they were all really thankful, because they had no idea they were in any danger whatsoever. And I guess that's probably the best way to find out you were in danger, when you're away from the danger. I don't know. But yeah, they were all let go. So the only people left back on board Flight 305 was Cooper himself, the flight crew, and one flight attendant, a Tina Merklow. The FBI, as well as they did meet his demands, they had the money in a knapsack and four parachutes that they were bringing up onto the plane. But they did have marksmen all around the airport waiting to, if possible, take out Cooper. They were situated all around, looking for the shot. If there was a shot available, they were to take it. Cooper being I don't know, some of the stuff he does seems really smart. Some of the stuff he does seems pretty dumb. But he was quite smart at this point, so he got the remaining flight attendant to close all the shades, so no windows were open on the plane, so the FBI couldn't see him, they couldn't make the shot. I don't know how effective shooting someone through a plane would be. If that was the case, I don't know. There'd be a lot of collateral damage. It's sketchy. I guess they were only there as a precaution if things looked like it was going to get really bad, I suppose. But he was smart enough to close all the shades, so the FBI couldn't get a bead on him. The money, the $200,000, which adjusted for inflation, I think if my maths was correct, is about $1.4 million in today's money. So $200,000 back then was a big chunk of change. That's folding money. Do you know that you can do stuff with that kind of money? So you think $200,000 today, it's still a lot of money, but it's not groundbreaking. But back then, that was like I say, a big chunk of change. The parachutes and the money were brought on board. Now, there is a lot of information out there about the parachutes. Some of it conflicting from what I've researched. Now, talk about a rabbit hole. This story is insane. I'm giving you kind of like the overview and the bare bones, and we'll look at some of the more interesting aspects of it a little bit later on. But the bare bones of the case is fascinating, but it is such a rabbit hole, and you can dive in so deep. I mean, I've got enough notes that where I could possibly make like a 3-episode mini-series on this, just on its own. But I'm being careful just to give a really solid overview of the story. But the parachutes that he was given is something that I delved into probably a lot deeper than I should have. I've been talking to ex-paratroopers, military pathfinders, all sorts of people about parachutes, and some say the parachutes he was offered were military grade, but he decided to go for civilian grade parachutes, and some say it was the other way around. But either way, the parachutes that he was given were not steerable. They weren't steerable, but like some parachutes, you've got to toggle either side so you can change direction and how fast you go, and you can flare it out and things. Apparently, these parachutes weren't those. These were just very bog standard. Pull the cord, canopy opens, you land where you land. You got no real way of doing that, which seems a bit of a strange, I don't know, thing to give him, or a strange thing to request. The FBI were worried that he was going to take a hostage with him. It was pretty clear by the fact that he wanted a parachute that he was going to jump at some point, and they were very worried that he was going to take a hostage out the back of the plane with him. So Cooper gave the instructions that the plane, once it's been refueled, should take off and fly to Mexico City, but he wanted the plane to be flying at a height of 10,000 feet at 200 miles per hour. He also wanted the plane to take off with the rear tail door open. Now the pilot says, yeah, we can do all that, but there's no way this plane is taking off with the door open. It doesn't work like that, mister. I mean, I can imagine that the pilot's a bit annoyed at this point. So I think he's like, do you know what? This is the deal. I'm the pilot. Look at me. I am the captain. You know, he knows he's in charge. Really, he's the only one that can fly this plane. So he says to Cooper, he says, look, we can do that. We can fly. First things first, this plane is not taking off with the rear door open. I can do it once we're in the air, but that's not happening. And Cooper's like, okay, fine. We'll reach a compromise, take off, but as soon as we get to 10,000 feet, I want you to open that door. And the pilot's like, yeah, okay. And then the pilot's also like, well, flying at that speed, at that altitude, we are not going to make it to Mexico City. The best thing we can do is fly to Reno and refuel there and then go on to Mexico City. And he's like, yeah, fine. I don't care how you fly there. I want you to fly to Reno and then on to Mexico City. That's all I want you to do. You can plot the flight path, but that's where we're going. You pick the direction, I'll pick the destination. And the pilot's like, okay, fine. That's fine. So at approximately 7:40 p.m, Flight 305 takes off again. But unfortunately, the weather begins to deteriorate as a storm front is blowing in. It's not pleasant. There's very fast winds. There's rain. Bearing in mind it's nighttime. It's not going to be pleasant up in the air in a plane, let alone in a plane with the back doors open. But that's what he wants. You got to listen to the guy with the bomb at the end of the day. Cooper then ushers everyone into the cockpit. He sort of ushers sort of Tina as well. He sort of gets her, sort of pushes everyone back into the cockpit, closing all the curtains as he goes. And then randomly he takes off his clip-on tie. It's a black clip-on JC Penney tie. And he leaves that on the plane, which later would offer up DNA from Cooper. So again, that seems like a bit of a dumb move to leave a solid piece of evidence behind, but there you go. At around 8 p.m, a warning light appears on the pilot's console, indicating that the rear doors were open. So that's Cooper manually opening the back doors, ready to jump out the plane with $200,000 and a parachute over the forests of the Pacific Northwest at night in the rain with a parachute that can't be steered in really, really fast high winds in loafers. Again, this is another tick in the kind of, was he a bit stupid column? I don't know. But all this stuff just seems stacked against him. I mean, it's not like he was bobbing around in a little Cessna doing a little parachute jump over the desert, in the sun and the warmth. He's jumping out in the cold. It's getting towards the end of November. It's basically winter. It's gonna be horrible. I mean, I'm an outdoorsman. I spend a lot of time outdoors. Hiking, camping, archery, bushcraft, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if I'd survive out there in those sort of conditions. But this guy was determined he was going to jump out over just in the middle of this forest in the Pacific Northwest. Nobody really knows what he had under his trench coat. Anyway, he might have been strapped for survival. I don't know, but it doesn't sound like he was. Yeah, so I mean, even down to his loafers. I went shooting. I do my archery in the woods one day. Again, weirdly in November. And it was rainy and wet, and I bought the wrong boots with me. I still had my trainers on. I packed my boots ready to get there and put my boots on when I got there in the back of my friend's car. But I forgot my boots, so I ended up trudging around the wet woods all day in trainers that just weren't suitable for anything. And I had a miserable time. My feet were wet. I was slipping all over the place. And this was for an afternoon. This guy is going to be in the woods for a while. It's going to be a good trek to get out of there. He just seems so ill-advised. But yeah, so anyway, sorry, that was a bizarre little tangent there. Do forgive me. And then sort of the plane experiences, because the doors are open, the plane experiences a huge drop in pressure, and it sort of flies all over the place, and there's a huge upward movement, which would have taken sort of some expert piloting to bring it back round. But the plane stabilizes, and it's between about 8 p.m. and about 8:13 p.m. that they surmise that Cooper made his jump. And that's it. No one ever saw Cooper again. That's the mystery. Cooper's gone. And that's what we're going to look into that again in a little bit more in depth in a minute. But as far as this part of the story is, Cooper's gone. He's jumped out the plane. No one's ever seen him again that we know of. That's the end of that narrative. At 10:15 p.m., Flight 305 lands safely at Reno Airport, and the plane is immediately searched by the police and military officials and FBI, and all they find is this clip-on J.C. Penney's tie. Like I say, that they could later get DNA from. But that is essentially where that part of the story ends. Cooper, folk hero, sky pirate, jackass, whatever you want to call him, has disappeared. He's jumped out the back of this plane and has disappeared. So between the years of 1971 and 1972, searches were conducted in the approximate area where Cooper feasibly could have landed, although nothing substantial was ever really found. I mean, it's a huge area. We're talking miles and miles of untamed forest wilderness. So it was literally looking for a needle in a haystack, and nothing ever really turned up. That is until 1978, when a deer hunter out in the woods near Castle Rock in Washington found a sign, and it would later transpire that the sign was the danger, do not open sort of sign from the back of the rear door on a Boeing 727. And it would later turn out that it was actually the sign from Flight 305. So that was the first real piece of tangible evidence that was found in the woods. That plane flew over, that somebody potentially jumped out the back of the plane. So that was the first real piece of evidence, and nothing would really happen again until 1980, when a young lad by the name of Brian Ingram was on vacation with his family near the Columbia River. They were on the banks of the river, exploring, doing all the sorts of things you do while on a family vacation, when this young lad came across a rotting parcel. And further inspection, he would find it was full of money. It was full of rotting $20 bills, totaling $5,800 of kind of dilapidated money. You see, what the FBI had done when they got Cooper's money together, they had photographed every single bill. They had taken note of every single serial number, and they passed those serial numbers on to sort of banks, casinos, racetracks, big hotels, just anywhere that might feasibly deal with large sums of cash, to make sure that sort of, if he did make this jump, and if he did sort of try and spend this money, they could potentially sort of catch him out, find out where he was based on where this money was. Other than this bundle of money, none of the serialized numbers, none of the serialized bills, none of Cooper's money has ever turned up anywhere that anyone knows about. That doesn't mean it hasn't turned up. It just means that it's never really materialized, or at the very least a significant quantity of it. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that it was only $5,800. Where's the rest of it? Did that decompose completely? Did that sort of end up in wash away to a different part of the river? You'd have thought, though, if he got out with all of his money, he'd have taken it all with him. I don't. Again, this is a mystery. It's unsolved. We don't know what's happened. We're trying to piece together. We're trying to work through this together. We're trying to work out what happened. But yeah, it's just a very interesting point that they found this money sort of years later. I mean, it's thought that the money had dropped into a smaller river and made its way down onto the Columbia River, being washed down over the years. But yeah, that was a piece of evidence that to be honest is hugely significant. Now, in what way, I'm not entirely sure. The case was later referred to as NORJAC, for Northwest Hijacking. And since Cooper's hijacking, well, a few years after Cooper's hijacking, when someone tried to do something similar, but we'll get onto that in a minute, all 727s were modified. The back stairs could no longer be opened during the flight. Although that plane has since been retired, and most airlines retired the 727 by about 1984 anyway. But I believe the last commercial flight of a 727 was in January 2019. And one other little tidbit of information I found, and I found it very interesting, was that apparently the name D.B Cooper, it wasn't the name he used. It looked like, from some of the things I found, he actually signed his name Dan Cooper, but a sort of a wire from one agency to another got it misconstrued, and the name came up as D.B Cooper, and it kind of stuck. And I don't know, D.B Cooper sounds a little bit more mysterious than, Dan Cooper. Yeah, I don't know. There's something about the name D.B Cooper, and I believe that was the I've mentioned before that I really like Twin Peaks, and D.B Cooper was the inspiration for the name of Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks. So again, you've got the Pacific Northwest connection, and I just think that's a nice little bit of information. But as the investigation went on, the original charge against Cooper was for air piracy. That's what they wanted to arrest him for. If they found him, they was going to do him for air piracy. But that only had a 5-year statute of limitations. So later on, a grand jury would indict Cooper for violating the Hobbs Act. Now, the Hobbs Act is a federal statute designed to prevent extortion and crimes of that nature. But that crime had no statute of limitations, so they if they found, I mean the case officially closed back in 2016, but if, let's say, a miracle happened and they found DB Cooper tomorrow, that means they could still prosecute him. They could still put him away. They could still throw the book at him. So they actually had to change the charge that they were trying to get him on, just because they knew this was going to be a tough case. They knew it was going to be ongoing, so they knew 5 years is going to pass quite quickly. That's why a grand jury would try to indict him for violating the Hobbs Act. So 5 years after the hijacking, the FBI would consider more than 800 suspects, but they would eventually sort of chop those down, eliminating them down to about 24 main suspects that they thought, you know what, this one of these 24 I think is DB Cooper. So the FBI think he's still alive. The FBI think he made the jump and he's running around somewhere, like Rockefeller, spending his $20 bills, chucking them out everywhere, despite none of these bills ever turning up. But 3 of these 24 suspects really, in my opinion anyway, really fit the bill. I mean, the 3 of these people could feasibly have been Cooper, or they have the most interesting story. So I figured I'd talk a little bit about these main suspects before we kind of round things up. So the first main suspect is a Richard Floyd McCoy. Now he's fascinating. There's been books and things written about this chap. The very, very interesting thing about Floyd McCoy, is he also hijacked a 727 in almost exactly the same way as Cooper did. He even used the same sort of note, like, hey, I've got a bomb in a briefcase, blah, blah, blah. The hijacking was almost identical to Cooper's. But the thing to note about McCoy is he was a student at Brigham Young University out of Utah. Both Cooper's hijacking and McCoy's hijacking happened while this college was on break. Now, the descriptions match. I mean, they're very similar looking descriptions. Everyone said that these two, McCoy and Cooper, judged on sort of witness testimonies and descriptions, they look similar enough to potentially be the same person. Both kind of mid-40s. Now, I'm not sure what it was like in the 70s, but you've got a student who's in his mid-40s. I don't know if that was a thing, but it was a different time back then. I mean, I suppose you get students of all ages nowadays. There's never an excuse to stop learning, I suppose. But yeah, it just seems interesting that that both these hijackings happened when McCoy could have been around. So that was quite interesting. Although, according to the FBI archives, McCoy was at home for Thanksgiving with his family the day after the Cooper hijacking, so he had a pretty solid alibi. So, I don't know, maybe McCoy was more of a copycat than Cooper. I don't know, but they're just such similar cases. You've got to ask the question, really. But unlike Cooper, McCoy was actually apprehended after his heist. They caught him, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. But McCoy, being an industrious young fellow, I say young, he was in his 40s. Yeah, maybe he had a little bit more about him. I don't know, but he escaped from prison. He managed to do this daring escape from his prison in Pennsylvania. But unfortunately, he would later die in a shootout with the FBI in Virginia. So, was he Cooper? Was he not Cooper? I don't know. There's enough evidence to say that he might have been. I mean, it's an interesting option, if anything. It's just they look the same, and you know their MO was the same. So you can see why he was a person of interest, but unfortunately he got taken out by the FBI. So maybe we'll never know. But he's just a person I wanted to bring to your attention as the first person of interest in the D.B. Cooper case. The second is a chap by the name of Dwayne Weber. Now, Dwayne claimed he was D.B. Cooper on his deathbed to his wife, Joe Weber. Just before he died, he was on his deathbed. He sort of pulled his wife close and was like, "Joe." I don't know how he was dying, but I imagine it was like, "Joe, I have a secret to tell you. I'm D.B. Cooper." And then I imagine he just died. But yeah, he had this deathbed confession to his wife that he was in fact D.B. Cooper. And then, I mean, this was completely out of the blue. She had no idea. She was like, what are you talking? She just thought he was just doolally in the last few moments of his life. But with that being said, it did sort of make her think about some of the things that Dwayne did and said during his life, which may have been clues. I mean, according to his wife, Dwayne would have a reoccurring nightmare where he would wake up in a cold sweat and talk about leaving fingerprints on a plane. I mean, at the time, she was like, "Oh, what do you want about? That makes no sense." But with that bit of information, with that confession that he's D.B. Cooper, that made more sense. That was like, hey, that's quite interesting. He also had a chronic knee problem that he got he said from jumping from a plane. And if you look at some of the evidence of what happened with D.B. Cooper and jumping out the plane completely unprepared, you've got to assume, like, if he made the jump, he would have sustained some sort of injury at least. So again, that kind of, it's very feasible. Dwayne's handwriting was also found in the margins of an old library book on the D.B. Cooper case. So, you've got to ask the question, is he actually D.B. Cooper? Is he checking up on what someone's been saying about him? Is he kind of researching his own case? Or was he, I don't know, a bit of a delusional fan, a bit of a fanatic? It's difficult to say. I mean, maybe if I was the subject of I definitely would. If I was the subject of a mystery and nobody knew, I'd look at that mystery. I'd be interested. I'd be researching myself. Although things are different now, you can Google it, but back then, the library was your Google. So yeah, I mean that's feasible, I think. But yeah, the other interesting thing about Dwayne's wife, Jo, is she also claimed that Dwayne took her to the place where the money was eventually found, which is on the Tinabar Beach on the Columbia River. So that was, again, I couldn't find a timeline for that, whether or not that was before the money was discovered or sometime after the money was discovered as a bit of a pilgrimage. I don't know. But again, the fact that he made the effort to go there is interesting to me anyway. And among Dwayne's effects, Joe found an old Northwest airline ticket, which is the Flight 305 was a Northwest Airlines ticket. Joe couldn't find any feasible reason that he would have this ticket. She didn't know of any trips he'd been on that would have taken him on a Northwest Airlines ticket. So again, this is just all stuff that if he hadn't made that confession would just seem completely insignificant. But because of that confession, these are all quite poignant points. So 29 years after former lead FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach left the Cooper case, he would later say that he does fit the physical description. This is about Dwayne. He does fit the physical description. He does have the criminal background. He did have a bit of a colourful past, shall we say. But Himmelsbach admits that although Joe Weber's story may have credibility, he ultimately didn't think that Dwayne Weber was D.B. Cooper. It was a false lead. He thinks maybe this guy's a bit of a fanboy, bit of a wannabe. But again, it's the reason why I mention him is it's some very interesting points, and credible points that are worth thinking about. Now, our third and final main suspect, or one I want to talk about anyway, is a Kenneth Christensen. Now, this suspect and theory began when Kenneth's brother Lyle Christensen saw an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. And now, I mean, I think this is where I first came across this case, was when I watched an old episode of Unsolved Mysteries way back in, it was either the late 80s, early 90s. One of my favourite shows. I love that TV show. He saw this episode of Unsolved Mysteries and became absolutely convinced that his brother was in fact D.B. Cooper. And there was also another deathbed confession from his brother Kenneth that he goes up to his brother Lyle and is like, "Oh, there's something you should know, but I can't tell you." I don't know why everyone sounds like that on their deathbed, but that kind of led Lyle to think, my brother's D.B. Cooper. Oh, that's cool. And also, when you kind of look into Kenneth Christensen, he was a flight purser, which is a head flight attendant for Northwest Airlines. And that's the same airline that Cooper hijacked. So that would support the theory that maybe this was some sort of an inside job. Kenneth was also reportedly a huge fan of bourbon, and all through the story there's incidents of Cooper ordering and drinking bourbon and soda. And yeah, I mean, that's a pretty weak connection. I'm sure there's a lot of people that like bourbon, but Kenneth particularly liked his bourbon and soda. So that's another little thing. Wow, it's all about connecting these dots, and it's all about adding up stuff. And add to the fact as well that after the hijacking in 1971, Kenneth actually bought himself a house. Now, it wasn't a huge house, but it was definitely, he had some money, he had some spare money to, throw around and to buy himself a house. So again, that did he survive? Did he take the money and buy a house? Did he chuck $5,800 worth of it in a river just to get people off the scent? I don't know. Now, when a photo of Kenneth was shown to one of the flight attendants who was on 305, now she'd been shown pictures after pictures after pictures of suspects. Like, imagine the FBI going, "Was it this guy? Was it this guy? Was it this guy?" And like I said, there was over 800 suspects. So she'd seen a lot of pictures. So maybe she's a bit blind to mugshots. I don't know. She was shown the picture of Kenneth, and she thought, "Do you know what? That's pretty close. That actually could be him." I can't. Yeah, she quoted of saying, like, I can't say yeah though. I think it might be him, but I can't give you 100%. Although the FBI did discount this suspect on the basis of that it didn't completely match the description. Another reason the FBI didn't think it was Kenneth was the fact that he was a paratrooper that was enlisted just after World War II. And he was thought to be a really skilled jumper, which Cooper was thought not to be. Cooper was thought to be not even an amateur jumping from a plane. So unless maybe he wanted people to think that he wasn't a skilled jumper, and he actually was. I mean, there's so many facets to this case. But those are the three suspects that sort of worth talking about. I mean, there are lots more suspects. There are lots more. Like I say, this is a huge case, and it's such a rabbit hole to kind of jump into. It's insane. There's so many things that could have happened, and it really is a fascinating story, if anything. And it's a hugely popular case, and he's, D.B. Cooper is kind of deified by some, vilified by others. Like I say, is he a folk hero? Is he a modern day Robin Hood? Is he just another criminal trying to hijack a plane, but gets a little bit of credence because it's rolled up in a mystery? I don't know. At the end of the day, he endangered the lives of 42 people for his own personal gain. So, as fascinating as a character he is, as mysterious as he is, like, he's still a criminal at the end of the day. So take from that what you will. There is a huge community of people out there that are sort of trying to discover either the location of D.B. Cooper, who he actually is, and there's some fascinating resources out there. As I say, it's a huge rabbit hole. You've got to look at the facts, and I'm a big sort of proponent of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is possibly the right explanation. I don't know. I mean, that goes against the mystery sometimes, but this guy jumped out of a plane at night in the cold, 200-mile-an-hour winds. He's not dressed for it. He's not prepared for it. He doesn't have the right gear. Talking to some of the sort of people about parachutes, some of these experts on various parachutes, they seem to think the type of parachute that it was wouldn't have been rated for that kind of jump, and most likely would have just been ripped apart as soon as he pulled the canopy. There's even one of the things I read about the parachutes is that one of the four he was given was a dummy parachute. It was a training parachute that was actually sewn shut, so under no circumstances would it ever have deployed. So if he'd used that, splat, that's not gonna work. How? I was trying to look for a little bit more solid information on that, because either he took it and it wasn't one of the parachutes on the plane that he left, or he didn't take it and it was left on the plane. So that was just another, again, the parachute thing. It's such a rabbit hole. So either he didn't survive or he did. He made the jump. He landed in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, survived for a few days, made his way out, and was living the life of Riley. I mean, if you think about it now, he's going to be, if he was in his mid-40s, as some of the descriptions say, he be in his 90s now, if not, died of natural causes, but potentially. So he may no longer be with us anyway. But we love a mystery. We love this kind of stuff, and you've got to admit it's more interesting to believe that there's more of a mystery than a man jumps out of a plane and doesn't make it. The fact that he's never turned up, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I find the D.B. Cooper mystery, I find it fascinating. And even the FBI said this is one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in FBI history. I think I read somewhere that if you stacked all the case files and like on top of each other, it would reach over 40 feet tall, this stack of case notes. So there's a lot of it's just a fascinating case, and I'm honoured to sort of sit here and talk to you about it. the case officially closed in 2016. Yeah, I mean, what do you think? Do you think, he made it? Do you think he this plucky kind of Robin Hood folk hero jumped out the plane with 200 grand and made it? Or do you think, he bought the farm, didn't make it? But yeah. But anyway, that's basically the story of D.B Cooper, the mystery of D.B Cooper. Obviously we're not going to solve this mystery in this podcast. But I have had such fun researching this, talking to people. I've put a couple of little posts on social media and stuff, and people have come out the woodwork and sort of said to me, "Hey, I love this case. Check out this website. Check out." And there is an amazing community of sleuths out there, sort of trying to get to the bottom of this case. So if you want to look into it yourself, you can't go far without finding someone who's willing to talk, someone who's willing to share their experiences with you. I'm a member of lots of different communities. I've got a lot of different passions, and the D.B Cooper community is brilliant. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. I am having the time of my life with this podcast. I'm finding myself studying. I'm reading books. I'm researching. I'm doing the stuff that I would never do as a kid. Don't tell my mom; she'll be cross because I never did this when I was at school. But yes, this has been Tradtown. I've been your host, Grizzly Jim, Mayor of Tradtown. I hope you've enjoyed that. Check me out on the various socials. You can find me at Tradtown on Instagram. Or if you want to follow me, I'm at that Grizzly Jim on Instagram. I'm still setting stuff up and sorting out hosting, and I'm still new. So yeah, I just hope you found that interesting. I hope I haven't prattled on too long about a subject that you either find interesting and I've ruined for you by talking incessantly about it, or you didn't know about it and you found it interesting. Well, either way, I hope you found it interesting. I would appreciate if you can. Feel free. No pressure whatsoever. But a little review, a little 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to on would be hugely appreciated. It helps me out. So yeah. But at the end of the day, I'm enjoying doing this, and yeah, I like having a captive audience, and I kind of like the sound of my own voice. So anyway, you take care. Shoot straight, and I'll speak to you later.